Shalom everyone, my name is Jacqueline and we will continue with a new video for our series study of the Torah. And today we will be reflecting and analyzing the behavior, rebellion, and transgression of the people of Israel in Exodus chapters 32 and 33. With our title being Rebellion Distances Us from the Eternal and Nails Us in the Desert. As we have been seeing up until this moment in the lives of the Israelites, the Eternal had taken his people through the desert after liberating them from the Egyptians. We saw how he tested them as well various times to see their obedience and fidelity towards him. He gave them commandments or mitzvot, which are instructions that they needed to follow. We saw how he took them all the way to Mount Sinai, where he gave them the 10 phrases, also known as the 10 commandments. And the people of Israel, as we can recall, did not want to hear his voice, for they had fear. So they asked for an intermediary, to which the Eternal agreed upon, and thus Moshe was established as the intermediary between the people. We saw how the people of Israel sent him then to go first and receive the words of Elohim, so he could come back to them afterwards and give it to them. There, Moshe lasted 40 days and 40 nights on top of the mountain in the presence of the Eternal, receiving the instructions, the ordains, the statutes, the laws, and the instructions as well on how to build the Mishkan, or the temple. As the days and the weeks went by, we saw how the people of Israel, or we haven't seen, but we will see, how the people of Israel began to wonder and have doubts about Moshe's return. And this is what we're going to see today. We will be seeing what happened during this time in the lives of the Israelites. And we will see how this is actually a reflection and a pattern of humanity when we begin to leave or abandon the things of the Eternal, placing them as something secondary in our life, and we allow for the strange happiness from the world to integrate into our life. Even as believers, we can think that everything is going great in our life, that we may be prospering in everything we do. But due to the weakness of the flesh, we can fall into saying or thinking that it is me. It is for my efforts that I am here. It is my work and my intelligence, it is all my doing. And once this thought comes into mind, we begin to see the shaping of what we could take it as a golden calf, which is what we're going to see what the people of Israel decide to build, forming an idolatrous and egocentric belief that it is by our merit that we are doing well in life, and that it's not the Eternal who has control over what happens to us in our daily life. Now we will analyze this reflection with the people of Israel, who ended up facing the consequences of the rebellion. To begin analyzing the pattern and reflection, let's begin reading verses 1 through 2 from chapter 32. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Get up and make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what's become of him." The people of Israel, as we can see, did not know what happened to Moshe. They did not understand why he was taking so long to come down from Mount Sinai if he was just receiving instructions from the Eternal. As a result, we see that in verse 1, it says that the people gathered around Aaron, telling him to make them gods who would go before them, as they did not know what happened to this Moshe, as they called him. When we read this, we understand that the people of Israel did not go up to Aaron without understanding what they were doing. It is clear that they gathered around him with a purpose, to ask for a deity, even after they had heard the Eternal say back in Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 to 4, "You shall not have other gods before me. Do not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that it is in heaven above, or on the earth below, or in the water underneath the earth." On the other hand, we also see in the text that they refer to Moshe as this Moshe, with the tone of lack of acknowledgement towards him and suspicion as well, because even though he had taken them out of Egypt, in the end, after all that time, all that space of time, those 40 days and 40 nights, they did not know anything about him. And this shows the lack of understanding the Israelites had, as well as their lack of loyalty and obedience towards the Father. Due to the negative mindset that they had about Moshe's disappearance and his lack of appearance, so to say, within the people of Israel for that period of time, they felt in their flesh that the only method to solve this problem was by asking Aaron for gods that could go before them, breaking a mitzvah or an instruction of Elohim. Now, how can we see this today? How can we see this aspect of the people of Israel relying back onto the deities of the world in order to fulfill what they thought would be correct, given that their intermediary was gone? So, reflecting on this and trying to analyze it how we can see it in today's world, there is really no better way to understand it than by going to Yeshua's words when he taught his parable of the sower. In Matthew chapter 13, verses 5 to 6, and then verses 20 to 21 say, "Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no roots." And from verse 20, "The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the world, they quickly fall away." Like the people of Israel, many who hear the good news of Yeshua come delighted before the Father, overjoyed about the promises that they received through him. Yet, once they cease to see life the way that they probably had expected it coming into the faith with material prosperity, and they start to understand that even as believers, we will go through trials and afflictions, that delight and that joy that they had from the word at the beginning, and that was beginning to grow as well, well, all of that withers, and eventually they allow themselves to go back to the ways of the world. We see that here with the Israelites, once doubt entered into their minds and heart, as well as a lack of confidence in Moshe and the eternal, they stopped waiting, and instead they chose to resolve the situation by going back to the practices that they had learned from the Egyptians. And this demonstrated that their heart was still nailed to the desert, to the Egypt where they once lived. And this happens when one has a lack of understanding of the Father's instruction and his will. Yeshua taught that even as believers, we don't know the times of the Father, and we don't know when the Messiah will return to bring judgment upon all of us. Only the Father knows that. He knows when Yeshua will return, and he knows what trials we're going to go through, and he knows the reason for them. But it's something that we don't know, and maybe in the moment we won't be able to understand. But it's important for us to know and understand and keep in mind that we must stand firm on this path that is Yeshua, walking forward in the Eternal's instruction. And we understand that even though we don't know when the Messiah will come, we do know as a fact that on the day that he brings judgment upon all of us, it will be a day where those who stayed firm will receive eternal life. Therefore, even though we live among the worlds, we must be patient and strive to understand and learn from the Father's Torah and his words through the Messiah, so that even in times of trial and affliction, even when we experience hardships, we are able to stand firm before the Father, so we won't have the need to return to the world to seek comfort and satisfaction in the way that they show it. And we can see this when Yeshua teaches us in Matthew 24, verse 13, "But the one who endures to the end will be saved." We will continue with the next thing we are going to analyze by reading verses 6 to 9. It says, "He received them from their hand and made a molten calf, fashioned with the chiseling tool. Then they said, 'This is your God, Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' When Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. Then Aaron made a proclamation saying, 'Tomorrow will be a feast to Adonai.' They rose up early the next morning, sacrificed burnt offerings, and brought fellowship offerings. The people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to make merry. Then Adonai said to Moshe, Go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have become debased. They quickly turned aside from the path that I commanded for them. They have made a molten calf, worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, and said, 'This is your God, O Israel, that brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' Adonai said to Moshe, 'I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people.'" Now, it is not completely sure as to why Aaron would allow for the people of Israel to do something like this. Some comments say that because he knew the inclination of their heart, the rebellion that already lied within them, then he allowed it. Others say that it was for fear that if he did not do so, then he would be killed in that moment, which would have also been a great sin before the Father, and the people would continue to do as they pleased. What we can see here, though, is that once the Israelites were given that liberty to make their deity, then they began to act freely. The text says that they rose up early, that they made offerings, that they ate and drank, and that they rose up again to make merry or to have a party. The Hebrew word that we can find here is hag, which means to have a feast, to have a party. And usually when we understand about hag for the eternal, is those celebrations, the holy convocations, the holy appointments that he had already set up for us. Those times where we all congregate together that are believers, and we celebrate and exalt Adonai, remembering him during those times of convocation. But in this case, we don't see this celebration or this festivity dedicated towards the Father, but instead we see it dedicated towards the world. And that is why the actions that they decided to take were actions based and focused and influenced from the world or from that modern Egypt at that time. Or yes, Egypt at that time. Now, we can see a similar pattern today within the world. There are many people who call themselves believers, who assist the cult of their tour of their churches every weekend, and even possibly read many books of the Bible and study them throughout the week or month. But what differentiates them from actual believers is their lack of understanding. Although they call themselves people of faith, the moment they are given the liberty to do something their flesh desires, such as partying, pursuing materialistic goals, living a prosperous life, having relationships, with whomever they please, and using as an excuse that they are from the same faith or from the same church, etc., then we see that not only do they party, but they even go out of their way to do everything they can to satisfy their needs in the most marvelous and excellent way that they can. For example, during the winter holidays, we can see many people, maybe not all, buying an extensive amount of lights and decorations for that time, buying as well the most expensive gifts that they can, and they even wake up very early in the morning, in some cases from like 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., in order to begin cooking and cleaning and preparing the most delicious and malnutritious meal that they can possibly create in order to please and satisfy the cravings and desires of their guests and family. Yet, when it comes to the things of the eternal, such as maybe reading the scripture every day and reflecting on it, praying and having that personal communication with the Father every day, or possibly offering a day of fast to the eternal, they can't do it. We don't see them put the same effort in all of this. And for them, it becomes a task that is too difficult to complete. This teaches us that the people of the world will push themselves to excel and succeed in the things of the world, even if it means that it will distance them from the eternal, while the actual believers and children of Elohim strive to make treasures in the celestial abodes, just as Yeshua taught. For this, Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 16, verse 25, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." The Eternal knew the heart of the people of Israel, as we can see in this chapter. And because he knew where their heart was, the Eternal called them a stiff-necked people. This angered Elohim, seeing that as he had given them instructions and after all of the things that he had done, they still chose to disobey him. And we see that he was disappointed with them and angry with them because he had given them instructions of how they were supposed to present themselves before him and before the nations, as the Eternal wanted them to be a nation consecrated to him, where his divine presence could dwell, so that the Israelites could be a light amongst the nations that would shine brightly before them, guiding them also to become a people consecrated to him. Yet Moshe, we see, interceded for the Israelites, and the Eternal subsided his anger and ceased from aiming to destroy them. But this did not mean that they did not have consequences. From verses 19 to 20, it says, "Then it happened, as soon as Moshe came near the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing that they were doing. They were even dancing before the calf. And his anger burned hot. So he threw the tablets out of his hands and smashed them at the foot of the mountain. Then he took the calf that they had made, burned it with fire, ground it to powder, scattered it on the surface of the water, and made the children of Israel drink it." Even though Moshe was an intermediary and he had just pleaded to the Father as well not to destroy the Israelites, he was also furious against them for their rebellion. And as a sign, he threw the stone tablets and smashed them in order to demonstrate how the Israelites had broken their pact with the Creator. Moshe continued to display his anger by burning the golden calf that they had made, destroying it completely, and then scattered it on the surface of the water, and made them drink it. This was also a sign to them that although the Eternal's fury had ceased from destroying them, it did not mean that they were free in the absolute. On the contrary, they were going to carry their judgment for the rebellion they had displayed before the Father, and would thus suffer the consequences. Today, we can see this reflected on the belief that there is nothing wrong in behaving or enjoying the ways of the world, as we have been forgiven through Jesus, as they call him. This erroneous and false belief has led many to think that living a life in spiritual debauchery and liberty in the flesh does not bear consequences. Yet, all of these decisions that are being made, whether if they are in a religious institution or not, all of these decisions have consequences. Consequences that they may not see in that very moment. Maybe you won't see like a lightning strike them down or anything physically and specific during that time, but the consequences will come in the long run. If not now, then on the day that the Messiah returns to bring judgment. We see that the Eternal also specifies this on verses 33 to 34. As youth, young adults, and adults alike, the world can be very tempting in what it offers, even in the smallest of things like food, clothing, money, family, friends, all of those things. But we must be conscious that living in liberty in the way that the world does has a price. In Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verse 9, it says, "Rejoice, young men, in your childhood, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, Elohim will bring you to judgment." This is exactly what we see with the people of Israel. They rejoiced in their hearts. They followed what their heart and their eyes wanted. They wanted to see physically the God that had liberated them from Israel. And because of that, they ended up having consequences from the Eternal. They were judged from the Eternal. And this is something that we see in our lives. Right now, we can think that we have all the time of our life, that the day of judgment is still far away. And we could see here, go ahead, rejoice, do as your heart pleases, do as your eyes want to do. But understand that on the day of judgment, we will be testing in accordance to our fruits, testing in accordance to our actions, and we will receive that price. In verses 26 to 29, it says, "Moshe stood at the gate of the camp and said, 'Whoever is on Adonai's side, let him come to me.' Then all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. He said to them, 'This is what Adonai, the Elohim of Israel, says. Every man put on his sword and go to and fro, from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay his brother, his friend, and his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did as Moshe said, and that day from among the people there fell about 3,000 men. Then Moshe said, "Consecrate your hands today to Adonai, so that he may give you a blessing today, for every man has been against his son and his brother." The first consequence that the people of Israel suffered was the death of about 3,000 men, as we see in the text. All those who had participated in the rebellion of the golden calf suffered death for their disobedience. With this, we see how they were literally nailed in the desert. When they were left there without the opportunity to see the land that was promised to their ancestors, and that they could have seen had they not deviated from the Eternal's path. However, through this consequence, we can see a characteristic that we must also have as believers. The tribe of Levi listened to Moshe, and when he said, "Whoever is with Adonai, let him come to me." Now, they were able to go towards Moshe because they had consecrated themselves to the Eternal, separating themselves from what the rest of the Israelites were doing. They did not take part, nor did their heart yearn for them either, as we can see that even though they were called to trespass their own family, they did not cower nor did they disobey. Instead, they fulfilled it completely in order to bring justice. We must do the same. And I'm not saying of going over and trespassing our family members the same way that the tribe of Levi did, but just as they stood with Moshe, today we must stand with Yeshua, consecrating ourselves to the Father so we can serve him with fidelity and obedience, not wavering weakly before the world, nor inclining our heart so it can have what it desires from it. Through Yeshua, we are called to be kings and ministers of his kingdom. Therefore, we must not stray from this path. The Eternal is looking for believers who are firm, who are obedient, loyal, and fearful of him, who seek to fulfill his will and his commandments, even when the world is rebelling against him. If we strive to serve our Father, then we will be spared from his anger during the time of judgment, and we will receive covering from our Messiah Yeshua. We will be spared from receiving that consequence of eternal life, and instead we will be transformed as the angels or the Malachim, as Yeshua himself had taught. And we understand and we see that the Eternal is seeking real servants who can serve him when we read John chapter 4, verse 23. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true servants will serve the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of servants the Father seeks. Now, this isn't the only consequence that the people of Israel experienced. In chapter 33, from verses 1 to 6, it says, "Then Adonai said to Moshe, 'Leave, get out of this place, you and the people that you have brought out of the land of Egypt, into the land which I swore to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, saying, I will give it to your seed. I will send an angel before you. I will drive off the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. Head up into a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not move within the midst of you, so that I do not destroy you along the way, for you are a stiff-necked people.' When the people heard these dreadful words, they mourned, and no one put on any ornaments. Adonai said to Moshe, 'Say to the children of Israel, you are stiff-necked people. If I were going up among you for one moment, I would consume you. Take off your ornaments so that I may consider what to do with you.' So the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward." Another consequence that we see that the people of Israel suffered was that the presence of Elohim, which would originally dwell amongst them in the Mishkan, did not descend to be with them. Instead, in verse 7, it says that when the Mishkan was raised, it was taken far away and outside the camp. And thus the Israelites mourned, for they knew and understood that, due to their behavior, they had fallen and distanced themselves from the Father. And not only was this a physical distance from between the camp and the Mishkan, with the Mishkan being really far away from them, but it was also a spiritual distance. In our time, there is no Mishkan where the presence of the Father can dwell, As the scriptures say, the Messiah did not come to raise a new temple, but instead to raise a new one made up of believers as living stones and with him as the cornerstone, as the head of the congregation. This is a new spiritual temple. Therefore, since we are temples where the Eternal's presence dwells, we must strive to maintain ourselves pure, clean, and separated from the impurities of the world that is covered in darkness. If we act like the people of Israel did in these past 2 chapters, allowing the world to seep into our lives by yearning the things that we used to do in the past, or by yearning to do what the world does, then we will be contaminated. And this contamination will cause our mind and our heart to be led astray, instead of having our Creator's Torah engraved in them. And as a consequence, His presence, or His Ruach, His holy breath, will cease to live in our lives, and we will become a temple where darkness dwells. And this is something that we can also learn, and that Yeshua teaches us when He tells us in Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 to 23, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. This is if you're living with the Torah. But if your eyes are unhealthy, if you're living like the world and allowing yourselves to enjoy the things of the world in the same way that the world does, then your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Yeshua has given His life as our intermediary between the Father, so that we could be washed from our sins. Moshe was willing to give his life for the people of Israel so that the Eternal could forgive them, as it says in chapter 33, verse 32. Yeshua has done the same, but in an even greater way, as He actually gave His life for the people. And He has done so we can have an opportunity to come closer to the Father, to live a renovated life in integrity, guided by His presence and Yeshua. We must not take this for granted, nor must we take His offering as something light, because regardless of the forgiveness and the favor that we have received from the Eternal through Yeshua, the payment for sin is still death. As we see in Romans chapter 6, verse 23, for sin's payment is death, but Elohim's gracious gift is eternal life in Messiah Yeshua. And if we decide to rebel ourselves against the Father, even in what we may think is inoffensive, we will suffer the consequences, not just in this time, but in the day of judgment. In Hebrews chapter 10, verses 26 to 31, it says, "For if we keep on sinning willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but only a terrifying expectation of judgment and a fury of fire about to devour the enemies of Elohim." Anyone who rejected the Torah of Moshe died without compassion on the word of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more severe do you think the punishment will be for the one who has trampled the Son of Elohim underfoot, and has regarded as unholy the blood of the covenant by which he was made holy, and has insulted the spirit of favor? For we know the one who said, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." And again, Adonai will judge his people. It is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living Elohim. The people of Israel, we see here, after breaking that pact that the Eternal had made with them through Moshe, after disobeying His Torah, His commandments, we see that by them allowing themselves to freely enjoy what they wanted to in their flesh, they suffered consequences. And those consequences seem pretty great when we, when we look at them and we read them and analyze them. And today, it's the same. The moment that we decide to trample the offering that Yeshua made, as we see here in Hebrews chapter 10, the moment that we decide to trample and not take into consideration Yeshua's suffering, His offering, everything He did for us, and we decide and to allow ourselves to live freely how we want to and how we think is correct, then we will suffer the consequences. Because a lot of the things that we see in the world go against the Father. That is why we must consecrate and separate ourselves from them. Let us strive to maintain ourselves close to the Father through Yeshua, so that our spirit is not nailed to the desert of this world, waiting for its consequence of eternal death. May the Father continue guiding us in His instruction and in His favor. And this is all for today's video. If you'd like, you can give this video a like and share it with others as well. You can always leave your comments as well in the comment section down below. Thank you and shalom.